To understand this next design, we have to understand a bit more about Louis XIV, the Sun King, as he liked to refer to himself, based on the mythology of the god Apollo. Prior to Louis's reign, it had been tradition that actual daily rule of France would be overseen by the king's chief minister. Upon his father's death, though, the 4-year-old was crowned King Louis XIV of France, and his mother, Anne, assumed the regency, entrusting the government to the chief minister, who at that time was Cardinal Mazarin. Both Regent Queen Anne and Mazarin ruled France as the young king focused upon growing up. But after Louis came of age, and upon Mazarin's death in 1661, the king made a startling announcement that he alone would rule the nation. He was 23 years old at the time. One could say that the height of the French Baroque was given birth with this decision, because what happened next was controlled by a confident, forceful, and vigorous rule. This is a good time to remind ourselves of the general description of the French Baroque era regarding the exuberance and grandeur of the period. Now, this was all completely in sync with Louis XIV's personality. And this is significant about here. Louis hated cities and feared the troublemakers and rabble-rousers who lurked in the urban fabrics. As he thought it was said, he and his mother at times felt like prisoners in their Paris quarters. He also feared the powerful aristocracy for good reason. Well, remember Nicolas Fouquet rotting in jail. In particular, his mother, Queen Anne, had complex problems with aristocratic factions who railed against the unfair policies, such as escalating taxation and the steady erosion of the people's right, while the absolute monarchy form of government grew. Well, from a regal's point of view, power struggles could quickly dethrone, and the city of Paris had become a hotbed of discontent. By the way, here, the king is shown, on the right, with his family portrayed as Roman gods and goddesses. Okay, so back to design. And vol-au-vent. You will remember things ended very badly for the chateau's owner, Nicolas Fouquet, thanks to the suspicion he aroused in the new king. That being said, the opposite was true for its designer, André Le Nôtre. Once the powerful and threatening Fouquet was safely in prison, the Sun King quickly swept the great landscape designer André Le Nôtre into his service. What Le Nôtre had designed for Fouquet was impressive, spectacular, but the king wanted something far more grand, something suitable for a king. And here you see André Le Nôtre in his prime, and up for the challenge. This is the man who will dictate the will of the Sun King on the land with grim determination to conquer nature. This is the man who, with support of a king, will change the face of Europe, and whose designs became synonymous with power, especially political oppression. In fact, he was so hated during the French Revolution that people broke into his tomb and scattered his bones. Why this fierce hatred? Well, let's explore his next and most famous design of all. The king took André Le Nôtre to his small hunting lodge about 15 miles outside of Paris. The lodge was located next to an existing small village named Versailles. And it's here that a design will evolve of colossal and grand scale. And to give you a clear view of what that meant, let's watch a short video clip.
Versailles wasn't built in a day. It all began in 1629, when King Louis XIII had a hunting lodge built, replaced sometime later by a stone and brick chateau. King Louis XIV inherited this small chateau. In 1666, the sovereign embarked on major building work. Over 50 years, he continued to extend and transform what became Europe's largest chateau, the Palace of Versailles. Architect Louis de Vaux designed two symmetrical grand apartments for the king and the queen. Louis XIV moved his government and court to Versailles. After a new program of works, Jules Hardouin Mansart replaced the terrace overlooking the grounds by the Hall of Mirrors, which became the court's main ceremonial reception room. Mansart further extended the palace to accommodate the royal family, the court, and all the government departments. With the servants, the kitchen, and stable staff, close to 10,000 people were bustling about the palace. At the end of his reign, Louis XIV moved his bedchamber to the center of the palace. This room was the hub of the king's daily ceremonial routine and that of all the Versailles courtiers. Towering over the other buildings, a royal chapel was finally built by Mansart on the same scale as the palace. When King Louis XV moved to Versailles, he broke with strict court etiquette and fitted out smaller apartments for more comfort and privacy. At the end of his reign, Louis XV built what the palace was missing, a real opera house. Architect Gabriel modernized the facades closest to the town. In 1789, the French Revolution forced the royal family to leave Versailles for Paris. The future of the palace looked uncertain.
Remember Louis's fear of cities? Well, as you saw in the video clip, he eventually moved his entire government here. That way he could also keep an eye on the aristocracies he did not trust. The palace, originally 1,500 feet long, was extended to 2,000, almost a half a mile, and housed thousands of people. Now notice that the axes seem to converge on the entrance court and, as it were, a particular room in the palace. Looking at it in plan, it's clear that they lead to one central focal point. It must be an important room, right? A hall of honor? Perhaps the king's throne? Well, of course, it was a throne. It was a room from which he ruled. The design focuses on the king's bedroom. I am the state, divinely appointed after all. You shall come to me. Ministers awaited in an antechamber to go into the bedroom for scheduled meetings in order of rank. And here's an example of a typical morning for the king. He dines discussing with his playwright ideas for entertainment for the next gala, for the day's follies, or the upcoming masked ball. The king was surrounded by aristocracy. Dullness was a tremendous sin. All in all, it was a very public life. Let's see some other indoor opulence. Of course, the famed Hall of Mirrors. I could look at this all day long. What an exquisite room, where the Treaty of Versailles was signed after World War I and where Charles de Gaulle banqueted with JFK. Magnificent luxury. Here's the Queen's bedroom, and the chapel where Louis XVI and Marie Antoinette wed. Clearly, we could spend many hours just walking through the palace itself, but we're going to take a look outside and catch up on our enterprising under Le Nôtre. Well, back to Vaux for ever so briefly. In perfect step with this climate of massive spending, we'll see Andre Le Nôtre far surpasses his first design effort at Vaux-le-Vicomte, by creating the world's most elaborate chateau grounds. Yes, Vaux was a Baroque masterpiece, but it was easily dwarfed by its new cousin, Versailles. Now, to give you an idea of its enormity, the Grand Canal that you see in the distance is about a mile long. The entire site is 1/4 the size of Paris, comprising thousands of acres. The total length from the entrance court to the garden's furthest extent is 8 miles. And it's at this grand scale that an important design feature can be introduced, the Goosefoot intersection. The intersection of allées, or paths, if you will, their intersection at a single point, 60 degrees between outside roads, as you see here. This is the same as the human cone of vision. Thus, a visitor can see all at once when focusing on a single point in the middle. Well, this is true for the king looking outside his room into the entrance court, as it is for those exiting the chateau to take in the vast gardens. Its effect was, well, it was a powerful design feature that packs a lot of information into one glance, all the better with which to impress and awe. A not-so-subtle reminder of who was in charge. And before we proceed on our tour, we need a quick lesson in engineering. Versailles is a palace of magnificent fountains, but we know French landscape isn't like Italian villas on hillsides with gravity flow fountains. And so very early attempts to pump water onto the site, as you see in this image here, was clearly not enough. It was obvious something on a grand scale had to be done. More water had to be harnessed. So in 1688, the magnificent machine of Marly, a wonder of hydraulic engineering, was created. Consisted of 14 gigantic water wheels, powered 250 pumps which lifted water from the Seine River, forcing it into pipes and then up a 500-foot vertical rise, producing 5,000 cubic meters in about 24 hours for the palace's splashing pleasure. The machine ran for 133 years, produced a deafening noise, and required 60 permanent workers to keep it running, and yet it was a sight to behold in and of itself. It was actually reported that the pumps dried up water reservoirs downstream, and I suppose for the king's engineers, that meant success. But by this time, full-scale water displays were regular features of garden entertainment, consuming more water in a day than was delivered to the entire population of Paris, consisting of 600,000 people. Continual expansion of the gardens constantly outran the existing water supply. By its final design, 1,400 fountains were created, and the machine of Marly was not able to produce enough water. Vauban, the great military engineer, was consulted, members of the Academy of Science were called in, and finally the Minister of War undertook a disastrous scheme to supplement water from a nearby river about 40 miles away. The idea was to transport it via canal and aqueducts. The project was abandoned after 10 years, after millions of dollars were spent, and thousands of soldiers who were forced into service died of injury and disease. So yes, nature at Versailles was controlled and orchestrated. It flies into the air and it splashes. It's whimsical, playful, and it tells stories. But it also consumed precious energy and finances and took lives, all from the sheer force of one king's will. Today, in high season, the Versailles Museum sponsors occasional grand water spectacles during which all the fountains in the gardens are in full play and visitors can stroll accompanied by music. But understandably, for the rest of the time, the fountains are off, and you have instead silent, reflective, still beautiful waters. Now, standing at one of those fountains, this is the Latona fountain, our back is to the palace, we're looking out, is one last note regarding scale. Now, remember those medieval places we looked at where the human body seemed to fit comfortably? Well, in contrast, Here, people are reduced to an insignificance in a landscape like this, and everywhere remarkable formality and control, no stray twigs, no misplaced leaf here. Nature is conquered. It's created to impress. The architectonic quality of plant materials and sculptures are at a massive scale. These urns are more than twice the height of a human being. They have to be in order to fit in with the rest of the landscape. And here is our axis to infinity. And again, a view of the statuary and urns in relation to an individual's height. Now, here's another important design development at Versailles, the allée and rond point. It arose from an old hunting lodge idea used to ride and hunt in the woods, but you couldn't see very well, and branches kept slapping you in the face. And, well, to make the whole experience more civilized, what they did was cut straight swaths, these allées through the woods. At the intersection of the allées was the rond point. Ladies of the court would picnic there. They would utter the expected oohs when the huntsman galloped through. And the interesting thing about this is that we'll find that this design feature, a garden feature, if you will, is worth remembering because we'll see it popping up again in very surprising places in future lessons. Well, this Baroque attitude is known as the robust and self-confident moment before decadence. Spent money like crazy and at a tremendous social cost. The king and his court moved away from the city, neglected concerns of the common man, certainly one of the contributing factors to the French Revolution. Yet Louis lived long and in good health, and he was still riding well into his 70s.